Now the next we hear of Bonnie and Clyde was Topeka, Kansas. This is where they stole the automobile in which they were killed. Directly after stealing the car in Topeka, Kansas, Henry Methvin said to Bonnie and Clyde, "Why don't we go down in Louisiana? I have a mother and father living down there. We could go in hiding with them." Bonnie and Clyde thought this over and thought it would be a very good idea. Not far from Arcadia, Louisiana, back in the woods, is where Bonnie and Clyde lived the last few weeks of their life. Here lived the father and mother of Henry Methvin. It was always understood between Bonnie and Clyde and Henry Methvin, if they were ever separated, they would always steal a car and return back to the house the next morning at 9 a.m. One day, Henry Methvin took his father off to the side and said, "Bonnie and Clyde are going to kill me. I want you to go to the governor of Texas, who at that time was Maud Ferguson, and tell her that if she will give me a pardon, we will get Bonnie and Clyde." Old man Methvin at once contacted the governor. She at once issued a pardon, which reads, "You shall be freed of all crimes of which you've been accused." Methvin goes back to his son and tells him everything is set. Now it's up to you. Henry tells his father one of these nights, "I'm not going to show up. So the next morning, I know Bonnie and Clyde will be back here after me. You be sure and have the officers out here to the road where this killing is going to take place." 2 or 3 days passed. Bonnie and Clyde drove into the Methvin home and said, "Something's happened to Henry. We sent him in after a sandwich in Shreveport and he didn't show up. Now don't worry, Henry'll steal a car. He'll get back here some way. He'll be here tomorrow morning. We'll be back and pick him up at 9 o'clock in the morning." Old man Methvin now calls the officers who are waiting in a hotel in Shreveport. They come out to this road and they waited. At 8:30 the next morning, old man Methvin starts into town with a truck. As he reached the top of the hill, the officers step out on the road and they said, "Say, where are you going?" Methvin says, "I'm going in after some groceries." Well, the officers said, "Now what's the idea? You told us to be here at 9 o'clock and you're going into town at 8:30. Now this don't make much sense. Tell you what you do. You pull your car to the wrong side of the road and you take the front wheel off and pretend you have tire trouble. And don't you let out a word, because if you do, we'll kill you just like we're going to kill Bonnie and Clyde." Well, old man Methvin made the officers promise. He said, "Now if my son's in this car, there's to be no shooting. I'll walk over to the side of the car, and if Henry is in the car, I won't say a word. If Henry's not in this car, I'll say, 'Where is Henry?' Now that's your signal to close in." That morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, far up the road approached Bonnie and Clyde. As they reached the top of the hill, Clyde, seeing old man Methvin in trouble, stopped. Methvin walked up to the side of the car and said, "Where's Henry?" Now everything had gone just as planned with the officers in the trees, but from the other direction was approaching another wagon load of lumber. This had not been figured on. After all, this was a public road. Anyone could come up and down this road. Clyde noticed a truck approaching, and it would be impossible for 3 cars to pass at this point in the road. It looked like Clyde decided to pull around back of the Methvin truck and maybe go back and help the old man. The officers in the trees, seeing their opportunity, they shouted for them to halt. Clyde at once went for his gun. Bonnie let out a terrible scream, and from those trees came a deadly blast of lead. Now I know the question you want to ask. What happened to Henry Methvin? Well, Henry showed up in the sheriff's office in Shreveport, Louisiana, the next day for his clothes, and the United States Marshal was waiting there with a warrant for his arrest for the killing of Cal Camel in Commerce, Oklahoma. Remember the pardon? "You shall be freed of all crimes of which you've been accused." Now, he'd never been accused of this crime. He was taken back to the state of Oklahoma. In September 1935, Henry Methvin went on trial in the District Court of Ottawa County at Miami, Oklahoma. Henry Methvin was found guilty of his part in the murder of Cal Camel. He was sentenced to be electrocuted in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary at McAllister. How do we know all these facts? If you had attended the trial with me, you would have heard how Mr. and Mrs. Methvin hitchhiked from Louisiana to testify at the trial, how they made possible the killing of Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. The governor, hearing about this testimony, on an appeal, the state criminal court ruled that the punishment was excessive, and on September the 18th, 1936, Henry Methvin's sentence was commuted to imprisonment for life at hard labor. On March the 20th, 1942, Henry Methvin was paroled.